The elitists at the Magic Academy absolutely despise assassins, especially when they come straight from the gutter. So the second Van Kruger steps foot on campus, an upperclassman, some cocky magic swordswoman makes it her personal mission to humble him. Our boy is just chilling, strolling down the corridor with his buddy, completely ignoring her existence. Big mistake, because she craves his attention. In a flash, cold steel is pressed right against his windpipe. She barks at him to grovel like the filthy peasant he is. Van zero reaction. Bro does not even blink. Ice cold, he reminds her that they are all just students here, completely equal. Then he literally grips her razor-sharp blade with his bare hand. He locks it down so hard the weapon is cemented in place. She panics, yanking and straining with every ounce of her magic completely shook. But Van He casually shatters the steel right in half. Metal shards rain across the stone floor, and suddenly the room drops 10 degrees. The dread kicks in. She realizes she messed with the absolute wrong guy. So who exactly is Van Kruger, and why is he built so undeniably different? Long before he ever rolled up to the academy, he lived in a twisted society where elite mages ruthlessly farm those without powers. They label the powerless as Garuda. The royal government brands this as keeping the peace, but let us be real, it is just systemic oppression dialed up to 11. Things get so toxic that the power-hungry second prince schemes to off his own blood brother Heinz. His ultimate goal: erase every single magicless human from the map. Enter our shadow-walking assassin. Van has 0 mana and no fancy spells. But what he lacks in magic he makes up for by basically being a lethal combo of John Wick's Hitman energy and Gojo Satoru's immaculate drip. Squaring up against one of the kingdom's most elite knights, Van folds him like lawn furniture using just a single brutal palm thrust to the face, instantly scrambling the dude's hard drive and sending him straight to the lobby. A top-tier mage tries to jump in thinking his shiny rank means something. Spoiler alert, it absolutely does not. Van packs him up effortlessly, shattering his jawbone so badly the guy cannot even mumble a basic incantation. And when that arrogant prince starts yapping about treating the Garuda like cattle, Van skips the debate and just silences the brat permanently. Mission accomplished, he regroups with Heinz, his day one bro. These two have spent a decade grinding in the trenches for this exact revolution, fighting tooth and nail to build a reality where regular folks are not treated like bottom-tier garbage. And now, with Heinz inches away from securing the crown, feeling like he finally won, Van journeys back to his humble village, desperate to reunite with his mom and little sister, the very people he clung to through a worn-out keepsake. But the second he arrives, the vibe is horrifyingly wrong. His entire hometown is reduced to a blazing inferno. Lifeless neighbors litter the dirt, brutally ripped apart and discarded like trash. He desperately gaslights himself into thinking it was just a random raider attack, tearing through the wreckage, praying his family is safe. Every ounce of blood he shed, every life he took, it was all to give them a peaceful future. Then his eyes lock onto her, his mother swaying lifelessly from a massive tree branch. In that split second, the entire universe just pauses. Before the trauma can even fully hit, a weak voice echoes out. It is his little sister Rena, drenched in red and barely holding on. She begs him to bolt, warning that the monsters are hunting him down. Out of nowhere, cold steel tears right through his chest from the shadows. The royal guards chuckle, convinced they just packed up the realm's biggest menace. But even with a gaping hole in his torso, Van stays completely locked in. Bro is absolutely relentless. Swallowing his pure rage, he demands the only truth that matters. Who ordered this massacre? The answer absolutely shatters his reality. It was Heinz, his ride or die. The exact same best friend he just paved the way to the crown for. The traitor steps out from the smoke absolutely shameless. He claims that ghosts like Van can wipe out elite mages undetected, making his mere existence a glitch in their system. That is why he orchestrated this purge, to wipe Van and the rest of the Garuda off the server in the name of royal security. Backstabbed by the one guy he trusted his life with, Van absolutely staring death in the face, he vows to drag Heinz straight to the underworld, even if he has to sacrifice his own soul to get it done. Locking onto his former brother, he forces his shattered body to unleash one ultimate forbidden assassin strike. Heinz claps back by manifesting a massive crackling spear of pure magical, resulting in our boy getting that iconic Toji Fushiguro treatment, a massive hole blown clean through his chest. The damage is just too critical, and Van finally drops. With his so-called bestie lecturing him about how his empathy made him weak, the king leaves him in the dirt to fade away alone. As his vision fades to black in his final moments, an eerie entity materializes. This mysterious beast offers him a literal respawn. So when our guy finally snaps his eyes open, he is nowhere near that bloody battlefield. He is back in his childhood bedroom. And there she is, his sister Rena, perfectly alive, flashing a huge smile as she wishes him a happy 15th birthday. That is when reality smacks him right in the face. The cold-blooded assassin just got clocked back a full decade into the past. Van desperately hopes it is just some twisted fever dream, but the air in his lungs feels way too real. Every single brutal combat technique he mastered in his past life is still burned straight into his muscle memory. Cut to a young mage on the prowl for a heretic. The armored knights trailing behind her are out here shamelessly trash-talking the locals of the Garuda district, casually treating them like nothing more than filthy cattle. Meanwhile, Van scrambles to wrap his head around this insane redo at life, frantically plotting his next move. The second a Garuda boy turns 15, reality forces him to pick a poison. You either settle for a dead-end gig. Because these guys lack mana, they pack god-tier physical stats straight out of Toji's playbook, meaning mercenaries can actually pull in serious cash doing scout work. But his mom is absolutely terrified of him going down that route. And she is right to be, because in his past life, walking that exact road is exactly how he crossed paths with Heinz. A massive red flag suddenly clicks in Van's brain, and he practically begs his family to pack up and lay low outside of town right now. He sprints off into the shadows to hunt down the Purifiers, a radical cult completely stamped as rogue heretics. Their whole insane doctrine revolves around this twisted idea that the Garuda are literal, and today is the exact day these absolute scumbags kicked off a full-blown bloodbath, slapping a holy cleanse label on it. Running and hiding is not on the menu this time around. He steps up and completely locks onto his very first target. The absolute cleanest hack to drop a mage is to slip right past their sensory radar, completely snapping their spine or scrambling their brains before they even blink. Van blitzes in, effortlessly snags first blood, and violently flexes his killing intent, so every single enemy knows exactly who is coming for them. He violently dances right around his attacker, completely hijacking their own mana-infused weapon to absolutely shatter the enemy's magic shields. One panicked mage hurls a deadly spell, but Van bridges the gap way before it connects, burying a devastating strike brutally deep into the guy's gut. With only 3 goons left standing, Van readies up to wipe the floor with them. But right at that second, a desperate cultist snatches up an innocent hostage to use as a human shield. The thug screams at him to drop his guard or the woman gets dropped. A heavy wave of regret violently washes over Van. He completely forgot to scan his perimeter for stragglers. Giving up is basically a guaranteed death sentence, but his hands are completely tied here. Van shoots his arm straight up instantly, taking a brutal, bone-rattling smash straight to the dirt. The entire gang swarms him like rabid animals, violently kicking the absolute living daylights out of him without an ounce of mercy. One paranoid freak screams that they need to end his life right this second, utterly terrified that he swears that letting him breathe for one more second will completely doom them all. But right before they can finish the job, a mysterious girl violently crashes the party. The mage blasts a massive frost wave, completely flash-freezing the deranged cultists dead in their tracks, coolly dropping an arrest warrant right on their frozen heads. Van is totally shook. Even back in his first playthrough of life, official backup was notoriously way slower to show up on the scene. The cold-blooded woman and her squad efficiently slap the cuffs right onto the radical heretics. But her piercing gaze immediately locks straight onto Van, completely baffled by the teenage boy who managed to solo 3 armed killers with 0 magic. Low-key blown away, she reveals that one of the corpses he just dropped packed enough fiery firepower to literally nuke the entire village into ashes. She was fully planning to tiptoe around that guy to stop massive casualties, but Van had already permanently deleted him from the server. Helene gets his name. Totally fascinated by this kid's deadly aura, she drops a massive bombshell suggesting he should absolutely enroll in the elite magic academy. Absolute legends and god-tier mages graduate from that powerhouse. So Van has absolutely 0 clue why she is suddenly scouting a magicless nobody like him. They step into a dead silent, isolated alleyway where the mage completely flips the switch and threatens to end his life out of absolutely nowhere. She sparks her mana and snipes a lethal frost arrow right at his skull. But to her absolute shock, the kid just vanishes into thin air and he did not even pop a single combat skill to do it. In a split-second blur, he spawns directly behind her back, camping in her absolute blind spot, totally primed for a fatal takedown. Right before slicing her neck open, Van pauses and aggressively roasts her terrible acting skills, calling out the fact that she was completely faking her bloodlust the whole time. The elite mage just smirks, instantly clocking that this teenage kid already moves like an absolute hardcore battle veteran. It completely blows her mind that he can actually flex on heavy-hitting mages by relying purely on insane raw mechanics. Helene then drops the heavy truth. The entire destiny of the Garuda slums could completely flip upside down if Van enrolls teasing the Academy's official knighthood ranking system. That specific system basically hands out massive power and perks to top-tier prodigies. Through it, even absolute nobodies from the dirt can rise up and build their very own wealthy noble bloodline. That literally means this entire broken district could completely level up in society with Van carrying them on his back. The highly skeptical assassin coldly fires back 3 rapid questions. First off, he points out that a slum kid would literally need a heavy-hitting VIP reference letter just to get his foot through the door. Helene does not even blink, instantly offering to pen that letter herself. Second, he aggressively demands to know how a dude packing exactly 0 mana could even survive inside a magic-only high school. Helene completely owns up to the weirdness, but she explains that a ton of people secured their knight status simply by cracking the code on brand new magical theories instead of just mindlessly spamming spells. From brewing insane alchemical potions to nerding out over complex runic circles, she breaks down how the magic system is way deeper than just throwing fireballs. The massive weight of his entire district is suddenly crashing down right onto his shoulders, which pushes him to drop the ultimate, most suspicious question of all. What is her actual angle in boosting a street rat up to a noble? Helene flat out tells him she definitely has her own hidden agenda, but she is keeping her cards totally hidden from him for now. Before Van can interrogate her any further, his sister bursts onto the scene totally frantic after hearing he just threw down with some highly lethal thugs. Right then, Helene drops the ultimate bargaining chip, giving Van a rock-solid reason to join their side. Swearing on the prestigious Steiner family crest, she promises absolute protection for his loved ones if he plays ball. Fast forward a few days, and Van's mom is still totally stressed out over his recent brawls. But the kid drops a massive bombshell, laying out his master plan to attend the academy and all the insane perks that come with it. Rena and his mom absolutely freak out, fully aware that the Magic Academy is strictly elite mage territory. But Van smoothly calms them down, swearing he is going to shatter that entire superiority complex. His bloody past as an assassin simply does not mesh with this new vibe, and he is well aware he cannot solo this journey. Helene's proposal basically unlocks a brand new destiny for him. Since he has literally kicked the bucket once before, Van is not about to let even the slimmest sliver of hope slip through his fingers. He confidently declares that he is going to utterly obliterate the toxic prejudice the Garuda suffer in this twisted country. His fiery words echo the exact same fierce grit his dad used to rock. Knowing her son's legendary stubbornness, his mom finally caves and lets him forge his own path. There is just one tiny little hurdle though: those insane tuition costs, which are basically impossible in this absolute garbage economy. Right when things look utterly hopeless, Helene swoops in and hands him a fat stack of cash as a bounty for carrying that mission, instantly wiping out his financial nightmare. Before he packs up, his mom gives him one last teary-eyed warning, begging him not to let the world's absolute cruelty poison his heart. Van shares an emotional goodbye with his squad and hits the road carrying all their wildest dreams on his back. A quick jump cut later, and our boy is staring up at the insane... And guys, this is exactly where the actual masterpiece kicks off. The kid is genuinely mind-blown. Absolutely paralyzed by the jaw-dropping architecture, he watches the rich kids buzzing around with zero cares in the world. Some stuck-up candidate loudly announces himself as Alexis von Hohenberg from the prestigious Hohenberg bloodline. Naturally, the security guard practically kisses the dirt in front. Then there is some chick flexing a recommendation from the Duchess of Krausenberg, another ultra-wealthy heavyweight. But the second our boy steps up to the plate, he instantly gets brutally screamed at out of nowhere. Spotting his glowing red eyes, the snobby elites surrounding him immediately brand him as just another trashy Garuda. The blatant disrespect is wild and things are only warming up. Keeping his cool, our protagonist smoothly tells the guards to back off, insisting he has not started any drama, stating clearly that he is literally just trying to enroll. But the totally triggered guard savagely roasts him, claiming the kid is too dumb to realize whose turf he is stepping on. Van instantly claps back, reminding this dude that the Royal Academy is supposed to be open access, where absolutely anyone can test their skills no matter their bloodline. Completely losing his mind over a basic fact, the guard aggressively shoves a spear right into the kid's face, flat out refusing to let a Garuda anywhere near the testing zone. Van internally sighs, wondering how this whole situation derailed into an absolute dumpster fire on day one. He could effortlessly fold this guard like a lawn chair, but sparking a massive brawl in front of this massive crowd would instantly nuke his reputation. Luckily, the slightly more chill security guy steps in, trying to de-escalate his partner before he causes a massive... Van actually feels a spark of hope that someone possesses half a brain cell here. But man, his expectations get absolutely obliterated in seconds. Those exact same rent-a-cops who were just licking the boots of the rich kids are now glaring at our boy with pure disgust, labeling him as just another delusional peasant. Van realizes he really needs to build a thick skin against this toxic double standard. The guard smirks and hits him with the classic, "We totally do not discriminate based on background" lie. But then he drops the massive catch: to even breathe near the entrance exam, you absolutely must secure a golden ticket from a certified noble. The guard smugly assumes our broke-looking protagonist wouldn't stand a chance. But Van hits him with an "actually I do," absolutely paralyzing the guy. before whipping out a crisp letter stamped with an elite noble. The second the guard locks onto the legendary Steiner family crest, he completely loses his mind, screaming at the kid and branding him a desperate scammer for trying to forge his way through the gates. In this dude's warped reality, there is zero chance an ultra-powerful noble would ever waste a recommendation on some magicless nobody. So he violently snatches the letter away, completely ready to slap Van with a straight-up capital offense and throw him in the dungeon. But our guy is absolutely not letting that slide. He grabs the guard, totally outmuscles him, and violently slams him into the dirt with a bone-rattling thud. The second guard's brain completely short-circuits, while the surrounding snobs just stare in pure, unadulterated shock. Both of these trained adults are completely mind-boggled that a kid with zero magic just body-slammed a grown man. They desperately try to brush it off as a massive fluke. Out of nowhere, a high-ranking examiner rolls up to investigate the chaos, and both guards instantly start sweating profusely, apologizing for the massive scene. Stuttering in panic, they snitch that a lowly Garuda is actually trying to enroll. Unfazed, the examiner locks eyes with the kid and straight up demands his identity. Van coolly announces himself as the personal candidate of the one and only Helene Steiner, dropping a massive name that instantly sends shockwaves through the crowd. After intensely scanning the document himself, the examiner physically confirms that the wax seal and the signature are 100% authentic Steiner property. His entire vibe flips in a nanosecond. He respectfully bows to our boy and practically rolls out the red carpet for him to enter. Let's be real, you absolutely do not mess with the Steiner bloodline. Suddenly, the kid is the main character in everyone's eyes, sparking wild gossip about how on earth a nobody finessed such a god-tier recommendation. Feeling super awkward under all the glaring spotlights, our boy quickly pieces together that Helene must be an absolute heavyweight in this society. Finally stepping through those gates, the kid scans the room, realizing every single face here belongs to a top-tier elite. And right in the middle of it all, his eyes lock onto a very familiar face, Dietrich, destined to become an unstoppable blade master. Then there is Shale, the future Grand Mage of Flames and Lunaris, a blonde powerhouse who eventually claims the title of Maiden of Might. Back in his past life, every single one of these legendary heavy hitters actually walked these exact academy halls. Reflecting on it, Van used to be nothing but a ruthless shadow assassin, a killer banished from the radiant spotlight where these celebrated heroes clashed for the kingdom's glory. But here is the crazy twist. When the brutal royal succession war ignited, every last one of these so-called heroes sold out to the rotten princes. Ultimately, Van had to slaughter them all. Talk about an absolute aura flex. Our boy is literally staring down a hall full of his future body count. Yet walking these grounds means stepping out of the shadows to rival them in broad daylight. It is going to be a grueling grind, but Van is dead set on tearing down the system and rewriting the kingdom's tragic fate. Suddenly, right in the middle of his epic main character inner monologue, some random snob barks at him talking pure trash, just because Van is chilling out. Genuinely baffled, Van claps back, saying he can stand wherever he damn well pleases. And the funniest part, this privileged brat actually thinks our guy is the disrespectful one. He immediately launches into a whole 5-page essay about his prestigious bloodline. Honestly, Van dealt with so much of this garbage in his past life that groveling just for a second almost feels like the quickest escape route. But then his mother's gentle warning echoes in his mind, never let a rotten world infect your soul. Ironically, even in his past life, Heinz dropped that exact same wisdom, preaching that folding to your haters never buys you an ounce of equality. He always urged him to stand tall and command respect. Unfortunately, the kid running his mouth right now is a hot-headed punk who makes the fatal mistake of putting his hands on Van. So much for playing nice. Van glares daggers at him, making it crystal clear who crossed the line first. And before little bro even registers the threat, Van violently seizes both of his arms, slamming the brat directly onto his knees. He unleashes Spelveg, a high-level martial technique that neutralizes an enemy's brute force, syncing it with your own flow to completely hijack their movements. It is the exact same savage counter he used to body the gate guard earlier. Seeing the rich kid planted on the dirt, like an obedient dog, Van extends a sarcastic hand, absolutely shattering the guy's ego. Pushed past his breaking point, the salty noble recklessly charges up a magic strike on the spot, but a single commanding voice halts the chaos. The entire courtyard freezes dead in its tracks as Prince Heinz steps up, boldly declaring that the Garuda people are treasured allies of the crown. Shaking, the kid instantly begs for forgiveness, yet Heinz plays the ultimate humble card, insisting he is just a regular test taker, like the rest of them, and begging to drop the formalities. He warmly reaches out to Van, but our protagonist is completely spaced out, paralyzed by the realization that this royal mastermind also walked these academy grounds. The ninth prince's sudden cameo has the entire student body absolutely shook. Nobody anticipated a literal royal to grind through a standard entrance exam. But what really grinds their gears is witnessing him treat a so-called lowly Garuda with deep respect, skyrocketing his pristine reputation even further. Meanwhile, Van's mind is flashing back to their dark past conversations. Remembering how Heinz casually bragged about his old academy days, that haunting memory just became a terrifying reality. Misreading the deadly silence, the current prince assumes he spooked the boy, confessing that he is honestly sweating bullets too, since this trial's survival rate is notoriously brutal. Reaching his hand out, Heinz flashes a comforting smile, urging him not to sweat the pressure and just give it their all. Van stares at that glowing grin with pure disgust. He remembers exactly how this prince manipulates the masses with that fake golden retriever energy. But he knows the twisted truth. Behind those warm eyes hides a psychopathic mastermind plotting absolute destruction. For a split second, Van contemplates slicing the prince's throat wide open right on the spot, but acting on impulse would instantly nuke his entire revenge plan. Swallowing the burning rage he holds for the monster who slaughtered his bloodline, Van forcefully bottles up his murderous intent. Catching that icy glare, Heinz looks visibly confused, softly asking if something is wrong. But our boy isn't wasting a single breath on this snake, and struts away. 0% interested in playing buddy-buddy. He leaves the royal standing there looking hopelessly abandoned, choking on a bitter dose of rejection. The surrounding elitists are left utterly mind-blown, immediately trash-talking the magicless kid as some kind of feral beast. A man suddenly unleashes a deafening roar. Silence. It is the head examiner stepping up to the podium to officially lock in the final roster of candidates. Next up, this fresh meat is getting marched straight into the combat zone, a legendary nightmare known only as the Forest of Shadows. That name definitely piques Van's interest. Cutting to the next shot, we spot the entire squad of examiners posted up right near the drop zone. The head proctor steps up to the mic, officially welcoming the fresh meat to the woods, which, surprise, is also their brutal testing arena. For this year's trials, he drops a hard truth they all know. This academy is famous for forging absolute legends. They only want powerhouses who can carry the kingdom's future on their backs, meaning absolute scrubs need not apply. Phase 1 zeroes in on a rookie's raw magic potential. And get this, the Forest of Shadows is literally overflowing with heavy mana vibes. Deep inside this treacherous zone, a specific type of flower grows. The mission: every single rookie has to snatch up exactly 10 of those blossoms. Standing in their way, though, are bloodthirsty, mana-fueled monsters lurking in the shadows. Yeah, this is not going to be a walk in the park. Our guy fully anticipated a sweaty challenge, but throwing hands with savage beasts from day one, that is wild. The proctor also lays down a strict law sabotaging another applicant's grind. Squatting up is totally legal for this run. But here's the catch. Every single person still needs to bag their own 10 flowers to clear the stage. The boss man actually warns them that rolling in a massive crew might seriously backfire on them. Oh, and the ticking clock, they have got exactly until the sun dips below the horizon to get it. Wrapping things up, the examiner hands out a special token to every single challenger. Smashing it sends an SOS for an instant rescue mission. But tapping out like that means you are instantly booted from the academy. The whistle blows and it is go time. The proctors order the crowd to plunge into the wild and start the hustle immediately. You have got the try-hard snobs out here desperately networking while others are just linking back up with their old squads. That leaves our boy flying totally solo, no backup in sight, but honestly, he prefers it that way. Van actively wants that lone wolf energy. As he steps up to grab his token, the head honcho just glares at him with straight-up venom. Shoving the badge into his hand, the guy watches Van vanish into the tree line. Sneakily, another kid starts shadowing his every move. But Van is built different. He wants all the smoke immediately squaring up against a beast packing a mid-tier mana level. To break it down, animals juiced up on mana are classed as magic beasts. Their raw physical stats absolutely dwarf a normal human's. Honestly, scrapping with them is way more of a headache than fighting a person. Out of nowhere, the monster lunges straight for our guy's throat. It hits him that ever since he embraced the shadow life, he only ever hunted humans, meaning it has been a hot minute since he brawled with a literal monster. As the beast dives in for the strike, I am actually shook to report this. The stealthy assassin literally clobbers it with a brutal warrior-style haymaker. All thanks to a super convenient beast-slaying combat style he has in his bag. It honestly gives off major Sukuna Heian-era meme energy. Dude just seemingly pulls moves out of thin air. Basically, this technique channels every ounce of a fighter's momentum into one devastating pinpoint strike. The sheer explosive shockwave from that hit rips right through any creature's flesh. Usually pulling this off is mad tricky. But against mindless beasts, driven by pure rage, it is the ultimate cheat code for an easy one-tap. The monster drops cold right at his feet. Van flashes back to his past, recalling how he was forced to throw down with mana creatures and master these exact lethal takedowns. Just a heads up, he is fully aware his little stalker is creeping in the bushes, but he plays it cool, completely ignoring the guy as he marches forward. Plot twist, it is actually a duo of haters who are totally mind-blown that a nobody like him is pulling this off. Living in total denial about his insane raw strength, they convince themselves he must have pulled some sneaky poison strat. They scoff at his supposed cheap tricks, confident it would never faze them. Meanwhile, the sidekick nervously points out that jumping other rookies is strictly against the rules. Honestly though, these toxic guys think the rules are just a fake out. Deep down, nobody in power actually wants to see a filthy girl. Plus, since Van openly disrespected the royal prince, this arrogant kid is fully convinced he can pack our boy up and totally get away with it. My guy literally thinks he is Light Yagami with the master plan, but he is rocking the absolute negative IQ of Yamcha, by the way. Cutting to the next shot, we catch the shady. The guy barks for the keys while the totally spooked guards nervously ask if crossing this line is actually a smart move. Assuring them that the beast is fully mind-controlled, this absolute snake plans to lock its crosshairs on completely wrecking our gate-crashing boy. It is an open secret they all want the Garuda kid permanently out of the picture. Since legally rejecting a recommended applicant was impossible, they have to play dirty. If a despised Garuda actually survives this test, the Academy's prestigious reputation is cooked. In their twisted minds, this justifies setting him up for a brutal end. The corrupt proctor is locked in and completely ready to pull the trigger on this grimy set. Still panicking, the guard argues that unleashing this nightmare could accidentally hurt innocent applicants caught in the crossfire. But the boss brushes it off without a second thought. He already scouted Van totally isolated in the wild. Knowing nobody would ever voluntarily hang out with the outcast anyway, he jams the key in, yanks the massive iron gate wide open, and roars into the darkness to wake the beast. Setting off to execute the so-called filthy Garuda to protect their precious academy prestige. The camera pans to the purple-haired proctor, the one whose gut is screaming that this year's trials are completely rigged. The head supervisor circles back to his side, probing him for any sketchy developments. The proctor assures him the vibe is totally calm right now, but questions where his boss just wandered off to. The supervisor shrugs it off casually, claiming that he was merely setting up a few minor details. But that sinister smirk totally gives him away. The younger staffer clocks it instantly, his internal alarms blaring. Cutting back to Van, our guy navigates into the shadowy depths of the woods, tracking down the exact flora he needs. Behold, the breathtaking heaven-tier blossoms. Plucking a single petal is his only objective here. But before he even reaches for the stem, he barks at the creepy lurkers, tailing him to drop the act and step into the light. The two snobs are totally caught off guard that he tracked their stealthy footsteps, instantly clowning Van for packing a hound dog's sense of smell. Totally unfazed by their pathetic rage bait, our dude claps back, stating he is simply accustomed to spineless rats ambushing from the shadows. Ironically, Bro catches himself mid-sentence, realizing he has zero room to talk since he is literally an assassin who runs that exact same playbook. The arrogant duo fiercely sneers at him, claiming trash like him has zero business breathing academy air, a fact they plan to permanently enforce. Van totally calls cap on their delusional logic, exposing their actual motive. They are just incredibly salty and desperate to avenge their shattered glass cannon egos. Sliding into a lethal battle stance, my absolute goat promises to literally beat that remaining arrogance right out of their skulls. Triggered by the disrespect, both brats instantly weave their magical glyphs, charging up a deadly synchronized strike. Analyzing the incoming danger, Van quickly categorizes the duo. One is a pure caster, while the other rocks a spell-infused blade. He starts brainstorming his counter-strategy, mentally breaking down the three core disciplines of magical combat. Category 1 features your standard long-range sorcerers, and Category 2 revolves around warriors actively channeling raw mana straight into their steel. Those guys are dubbed Spellblades. Finally, the third tier relies on intense physical augmentation, universally known as the Mana Brawlers. Pairing two completely different fighting styles in a single squad is notoriously overpowered, effectively covering each other's blind spots. Scanning the nervous twitch in one of the kids' eyes, Van instantly calculates that these rookies have zero actual bodies on their record. Regardless, they are absolutely gunning for his throat. Van genuinely wants to avoid dropping these kids, mainly because of the massive double standard. If a lowly Garuda bites the dust, nobody bats an eye, and the Academy simply sweeps it under the rug as a tragic training glitch. But if a highborn heir gets unalived, their entire bloodline will mobilize an absolute manhunt, putting the entire Garuda faction in massive jeopardy. When it comes to petty blood feuds, the aristocrats of this empire are incredibly toxic and a colossal headache to navigate. They built their empires entirely on relentless warfare, meaning they never back down from a clash. However, our guy fiercely rejects triggering that exact timeline today. solely focused on staying completely off the radar. Therefore, he officially locks away his lethal assassin arsenal for this matchup, deciding to utterly obliterate their willpower, instead breaking them until they practically beg to tap out. His icy glare fiercely aggravates the snobs, especially the bowl-cut kid who violently unleashes his Zephyr Gale firing razor-sharp air currents directly at our protagonist. Even though Van brilliantly sidesteps the blast, a stray gust, the arrogant noble actually applauds his reflexes, hyping up his own move as a guaranteed one-shot kill. Our boy is completely unbothered by the mediocre win trick, while this privileged kid randomly drops a massive lore dump, bragging endlessly about his bloodline's ultra-secret Phantom Edge spell. Basically, we are looking at a budget version of Sukuna's Cleave and Dismantle, rendering the incoming slashes completely invisible to the naked eye. The brat immediately claims the victory, arrogantly commanding the Garuda to drop to his knees and start praying for mercy. But Van flawlessly counters, labeling it a pathetic, lukewarm summer breeze. He mocks House Valtre for specializing in basic air conditioning, which is honestly a straight-up legendary roast. Bro sliced this kid's ego deeper than any windblade ever could, baiting him into instantly popping his ultimate skill, the Zephyr Hurricane. This leveled-up barrage expands its area of effect, violently shredding the surrounding trees into absolute splinters. But Van's footwork is heavily unmatched, as he flawlessly weaves through the phantom storm of blades. It is not like he magically gained X-ray vision. Nah, he is just insanely gifted at reading pure, unfiltered bloodlust, and dodging exactly where the intent spikes. Closing the gap in a heartbeat, Van violently buries a savage right hook deep into the kid's stomach, serving up a brutal reality check that will sting for weeks. With the caster violently knocked out cold, the Spellblade desperately tries to salvage their hype, aggressively rushing his target head-on. Van sharply locks onto the enemy's grip, instantly downloading the kid's entire combat rhythm, because as long as he dodges the actual steel, it functions exactly like your basic street brawl. Except pulling that off is not exactly a walk in the park either, considering the sheer tip of that glowing blade alone. The strike is an absolute blur, way quicker than your average hook. But our guy's reaction time is cracked. He closes the gap instantly, snatching the dude's wrist, totally ignoring the blade itself. Using the momentum, he smoothly pivots the arm, throwing the kid off balance, before dropping him with a brutal neck strike. Right on cue, player 2 stumbles back to his feet. Van basically double dares him to step up, making it crystal clear that the training wheels are coming off. The kid is literally shaking, ready to tap out, pleading to just call it quits. But right then, the air gets ridiculously heavy. Van's survival instinct starts screaming at him that something is seriously off script. Actually caring about these rich snobs, he yells at them to sprint the heck away. Crashing through the trees is a massive beast dripping in crimson. Its aura is so straight up terrifying that everyone freezes like statues. Boom. One casual swipe sends the whole trio flying through the sky before slamming them hard into the dirt. Van is struggling to compute what just hit him. Pure dread washes over his face as he recognizes the Hellboar, an absolutely broken elite tier nightmare that has zero business roaming these woods. The beast winds up for round 2. For context, these monsters are notoriously dubbed the Cursed Fangs. Their mana-infused tackles hit with the explosive force of literal artillery magic. Basically, if you tank a couple of hits, it is game over. Knowing this is a straight-up death sentence, Van commands the duo to bail immediately. One guy is fully down to dip, but Curly Hair is completely rooted to the spot, totally throwing our protagonist off. Don't get it twisted though, he isn't having a heroic moment. The initial tackle literally crushed his ankle, leaving him completely paralyzed on the ground. Van's attention is entirely glued to the injured kid, instead of the massive threat zooming right at his skull. The situation is a chaotic mess. Since grabbing the dude and dipping isn't even an option, the beast would blitz them in seconds, especially knowing these creatures relentlessly hunt down locked-on targets. Plan B is to crush their emergency token and summon a proctor, but the backup squad would definitely take way too long. The dude with the busted leg decides he is useless dead weight, demanding his buddy leave him behind, clutching onto his aristocratic ego till the bitter end. Repping the Voltrake bloodline, he wants to solo this nightmare. But his homie is absolutely not leaving his bro behind, convinced that pulling a stunt like that would permanently trash his family's reputation. While these Nepo babies are having an emotional soap opera, Van is just cringing hard. Regardless, he barks at them to smash the tracker. He volunteers to hold the aggro while they signal for help. But one of the brats refuses to take an L and drag his family name through the mud. Honestly, both of these prep school kids are on that exact same wavelength, choosing to go out casting spells rather than surviving as cowards. Oh yeah, these absolute clowns and their fragile Vegeta tier egos are seriously exhausting Van. He screams that if they are actually staying on the battlefield, they better lock in and fight for the W. because surviving and clutching the victory is what real nobility looks like. But totally missing the deep motivational speech. They just keep dropping that trashy Garuda slur. Meanwhile, the monster is literally pausing the fight so they can finish their dialogue. But reality finally snaps back, as the beast is just centimeters from pulverizing them. Up in the stands, the shady overseer is just kicking back, smirking because his master plan is finally unfolding. Hearing him mumble, the main proctor gets suspicious, asking what the heck he means. The creepy dude totally dodges the question immediately, pivoting to ask if any rescue flares have popped off, which is a solid 0. It has been dead silent out there. This radio silence just fuels the guy's sick joy, utterly convinced that the outcast got stomped so brutally. He didn't even get a split second to smash his panic button. Here is the massive plot twist. Every single recruit had their personal gear confiscated, right before the exams kicked off. This grimy official literally swiped Van's bag and shoved it right into the beast's snout, hardwiring the demonic pig to hunt down that exact scent. Setting up such an overpowered trap, the guy is certain it is game over for our boy. And all he has to do now is write up the fake accident report. Bro is out here giggling to himself, legitimately thinking he is some absolute mastermind like Ayano, while the head proctor is heavily side-eyeing him, wondering what on earth this creep is cooking up. Cutting straight back to the deathmatch, the ridiculously overpowered boss monster is somehow still closing the distance. The trio braces for impact with our MC rapidly calculating their combo attack. He plans to tank the vanguard position, setting up an opening for the mages to pop off. But these intensely stubborn, rich kids refuse to let a commoner call the shots. Honestly, they better check their egos quickly because the behemoth is already mid-lunge. Spotting a microsecond opening, Van explodes forward like a rocket, zeroing in straight on the creature's blind spot, and unleashes a devastating collapse strike that actually makes the massive tank stumble. The sheer impact of the blow leaves the two snobs absolutely speechless. Retribution isn't just a move. It's a hyper-focused counter technique designed to pinpoint and completely shut down an enemy's next combo. Think about it. When a four-legged tank like the Hellboar charges, the head always leads the massive momentum. Reading that exact telegraph, Van times a brutal armor-piercing strike right at the sweet spot. But here's the catch. The hit doesn't fully connect. It barely scratches this magical juggernaut. Despite keeping his god-tier martial arts knowledge, his current body is severely lacking the decade of raw muscle and insane stamina he used to have. Simply put, one-shotting high-tier boss monsters is completely off the table right now. Pivoting his strategy, he screams at his squad to launch a massive combined assault, prompting the Wind Noble to spam a The magic swordsman jumps into the fray too, swinging his enchanted blade with everything he's got to slice open the beast's insanely thick armor. But his weapon literally bounces off. Dude might as well be hacking at a solid titanium boulder. 0 damage dealt. All this flashy combo attack manages to do is completely piss. Spotting the danger instantly, Van screams for everyone to hit the dirt because this massive hunk of raging bacon is revving up to absolutely steamroll everything in its path. By some absolute miracle, our squad survives the stampede. Nobody takes a direct hit, not even the spoiled rich kids. Van is honestly just relieved they aren't flat pancakes, while one of the nobles flexes that he barely deflected the Hellboar's crash course using a desperate blast of wind magic. That clutch move literally saved them from an instant game over. Meanwhile, the magic swordsman is standing there doing absolutely nothing. But Van refuses to let them throw in the towel, hyping them up for one final desperate push. Honestly, it sounds like straight-up suicide. Yet our boy promises that with the very next strike, he is shipping this demonic pig straight to the afterlife. The Valtraic noble stares at him like he just lost his mind. I mean, makes sense. They literally couldn't even put a dent in the monster's passive magic shield seconds ago. Switching up the tactics, Van commands him to weave scattered rocks into his airflow, massively boosting the raw kinetic damage of his wind abilities. Mindless slashing is a total flop, but driving all that force into a single concentrated stab, that is the play. Taking notes, the noble questions what exactly Van is cooking up. Because let's be real, the math isn't mathing. Even if all three of them combine their ultimate moves, this beast completely outscales them. The cynical noble automatically assumes Van is using them as cannon fodder. He's convinced Van is hyping them up just to create a distraction for his own selfish getaway. Logically ditching the limping kid is the obvious survival strat, but our king is currently radiating some absolute main character energy. He is entirely way too base to stoop down to cheap payback. Van proudly declares that his ultimate endgame is to finally force the kingdom to treat his family and the entire Garuda tribe with genuine respect and equality. To actually achieve something that massive, turning his back on his squad and pulling a runner just isn't in his DNA. Seeing Van drop absolute bars while literally standing up to protect them hits the arrogant noble like a truck. He suddenly remembers all the toxic garbage he put Van through, feeling physically sick with his own guilt. Shifting back to the giant demon pig, this monster is furiously spinning around for round 3. Van screams at the top of his lungs, commanding the squad to fire away. The Hellboar revs its engine, rocketing toward them at maximum velocity. Snapping into action, the Wind Noble triggers Blade Dance, summoning a furious tornado packed with jagged shrapnel. This sick ultimate move, officially dubbed Black Dust Skyrend, sucks up heavy rubble and machine guns it directly at the incoming giant. For the first time, the boss monster is actually taking heavy chip damage. Staggered by the blinding barrage, it leaves its guard wide open for our boy to slide right into the kill zone. Launching himself airborne, Van violently tackles the creature, locking a brutal grip right around its skull. Unlike the human anatomy, four-legged predators don't actually have collarbones connecting their front shoulders to their spines. This biological quirk gifts them crazy agility in their front limbs, but it secretly leaves their entire structural balance absurdly vulnerable to sudden twisting forces. Exploiting that exact glitch, Van unleashes his signature Gookie combo technique number 10, violently slamming the massive beast face first into the dirt. Without skipping a beat, he yells at the swordsman to rush in and sink his blade deep into the monster's exposed heart right near the chest cavity. The Sword Kid is literally inches away from claiming the MVP highlight reel, but locking eyes with the terrifying demonic beast, he completely freezes up. Swallowing his massive panic, he aggressively shoves his blade forward, securing a perfectly timed lethal critical strike. The entire squad goes absolutely wild as the glowing weapon buries itself deep inside the Hellboar's chest, skewering the core. They think the boss raid is finally over until the giant beast triggers a brutal second-phase survival mechanic, violently throwing its massive weight up. A massive shockwave erupts, tossing the boys away like absolute ragdolls. This nightmare ability is known as Curse Break, and only a handful of Apex-tier monsters can actually activate. The monster unleashes an ear-piercing scream, overflowing with dense magical energy, detonating the entire battlefield into a massive cratering explosion. The Sword Kid instantly coughs up a terrifying amount of blood. The sheer force of the shockwave has completely scrambled his internal organs. Flipping the entire script, the Hellboar snatches back all the momentum, looking like it's about to sweep this entire party. Paralyzed by pure dread, the bleeding noble helplessly. Out of nowhere, Van aggressively steps into the line of fire, throwing his own frail body out to tank the full-speed heavyweight execution charge. He busts out a fusion technique known as the Lance Spiral. It essentially catches the kinetic force and channels it right into the dirt, swirling the shockwave completely around him. But the monster is totally baffled and pissed. It doubles down on its charge, cranking up the horsepower until Van literally cannot deflect the crushing pressure anymore. Backed into a corner, he debates pulling out his ultimate trump card. Sure, it threatens to absolutely wreck his own physical body, but it is basically their one and only ticket to surviving this death trap. He immediately barks at the other kid to bolt, and the boy does not hesitate to sprint out of the danger zone. Now flying solo, Van puts everything into holding the line, but the Hellboar overpowers him, launching him through the air and slamming him brutally against a massive tree. The impact is bone-crushing. The kid with the busted leg attempts to hobble over and help, but our guy screams at him to stay put. Smelling blood, the Hellbringer rushes in to finish the job while Van is pinned down. The tension in the air is thick enough to cut with a knife, and it genuinely looks like game over for our hero. Out of nowhere, the ex-assassin drops a highly specific battle chant, completely shattering his physical limiters. But before he can act, a massive long-range projectile blasts the beast, violently throwing it off its path. This ambush is actually a high-tier magic spell. Van recognizes the signature energy instantly, and locks eyes with the caster. Talk about an insane plot twist, it is Heinz. The royal prince actually showed up to play the hero. The panicked nobles immediately swarm His Highness, begging him to evacuate the area, but Heinz completely shoots down the idea, preaching that true royals have a sacred duty to shield their citizens. That speech instantly hypes up the elite squad, but our boy sees right through the prince constantly uses this exact same script to manipulate his pawns, hyping them up right before sending them to the slaughterhouse. Heinz starts playing the best friend role with the nobles, foolishly believing the power of friendship. Van is absolutely sick of the theatrics and aggressively shuts him down. The harsh rejection leaves the royal completely speechless, prompting him to demand what Van actually wants. Our guy doubles down on his refusal, making it crystal clear he does not need royal charity. The rich kid starts screaming at him for disrespecting the crown, furious that he is trash-talking the exact same guy who just bailed them out. Van, however, is not having it. He claps back, stating cold hard facts. If the prince had not crashed the party, he would have already executed the beast. To the elites, he sounds insanely arrogant and toxic. It honestly gives off major sore loser energy, like a gamer making up excuses after getting wiped. Heinz silently observes as Van steps up to solo the Hellbringer. The absolute madman even tells the prince to grab some popcorn and spectate, claiming he is going to clear this raid single-handedly. The Hellbringer revs up its engines for another high-speed rush. Ralph desperately wants to land just one solid blow, but Van commands him to back off, warning that rushing in blindly is basically a death sentence. They are literally hanging on by a thread. Van instructs the squad to stay locked in and wait for his exact cue. This bossy attitude rubs Hines the wrong way, though he watches with piqued curiosity. The climax is here. Van drops the signal to execute the final phase, leaping out into the front line to confront the nightmare head-on. He might have tilted a minute ago, but right now, he is keeping his ultimate skill locked away, relying purely on hardcore combat strategy. The Hellboar launches its massive frame at him, but our boy smoothly deflects it with an explosive rising uppercut. After completely whiffing its last 3 dashes, the mutated animal finally respects its prey as a genuine threat. This realization forces the Hellboar to switch its tactical approach, injecting heavy caution into every single swipe. Predicting the beast is throwing a bait attack, Van flows right into motion. Thrilled to realize he can easily parry the hits now that the beast has lost its reckless aggression, the demon pig screeches, aiming to impale him with its razor-sharp tusks, but Van executes some insane body control, weaving through the hitbox flawlessly. The peanut gallery, including Hines, are completely flabbergasted. They cannot process how a guy is pulling off this kind of agility with 0 mana buffs. Meanwhile, Van punishes the Hellboar with another devastating blow, perfectly shifting his center of gravity to maximize damage output. The flawless footwork is so majestic, Hines has only ever witnessed elite-tier mages pull off something similar. The brawl drags on with Van essentially making an absolute fool out of the giant creature, spamming rapid-fire strikes straight toward its skull. Yet, despite the crazy combos, he lacks the firepower to put the beast to sleep. This is the huge downside of fighting raw. Without arcane enchantments buffing his fists, his brutal punches basically feel like annoying mosquito bites to the armor-plated freak, giving the Hellbringer its confidence back. Hines internally panics at this shift in momentum, but our boy is playing 4D chess. He is purposely baiting the monster into a false sense of security so it gets sloppy. Charging up its signature sonic scream, Van spots the exact animation for the Roarbreaker skill about to detonate. The perfect window opens up, and he screams at the wind user to drop his payload. Obeying the call, the noble spams, rending sky, funneling a literal tornado straight down the throat of the beast. The concentrated pressure forcefully clogs its windpipe, making the sonic blast violently backfire inside its own skull. Using the terrain to his advantage, Van violently seizes the opening, dropping down point blank in front of the staggered enemy. Clasping his hands tightly together, he instantly activates his deadly doppelganger technique. He unleashes a hidden technique, generating his own seismic blast. The strike triggers a double-sided concussion wave, designed to completely liquefy the beast's brain from the inside out. The hit connects flawlessly, dropping the hulking nightmare dead in its tracks. With the magical shield shattered, Van barks at the posh kid, hyping him up to take the ultimate kill shot. 0 hesitation, the aristocrat lunges forward, absolutely shredding through the boar's thick skull, ending the mutant pig's reign of terror for good. The wind-wielding rich kid is totally shook, gasping about how crazy it is that they actually dropped a literal Hellboar. Meanwhile, Van drags himself up from the dirt and strolls over to the snooty noble, extending a hand to check if he survived the madness. He asks if the guy's legs are still working. For a split second, the rich kid ditches his massive ego and firmly grasps our hero's hand to hoist himself up. He immediately starts whining about how that brutal sound wave nearly shattered his bones. Van coolly breaks it down, explaining that the roar was laced with raw mana, which absolutely wrecked his equilibrium. The ex-killer casually drops a pro tip, telling him to plug his ears next time to tank the damage way better. The noble flashes a rare tiny smirk, swearing to stash that advice for later. Though he prays to high heaven he never has to brawl with a Hellboar again. With the boss fight officially cleared, Van snaps back to reality, scanning the zone for the quest items they actually need to pass this brutal exam. But reality hits hard. Only 2 pristine Heaven's Tear flowers survive the chaos. This instantly triggers a flashback to the Proctor's warning about the messy politics of teaming up in a survival test. A creeping sense of dread washes over him, as his mind races for a solution, totally aware the clock has run out to scavenge for more. But before he can strategize, the Wind Mage snatches both surviving blooms without a second thought. He immediately marches straight up to Prince Hines and bows deeply, offering up the prize. The royal heir accepts the loot with total grace, murmuring a soft thank you. Watching this VIP treatment play out, our boy ruthlessly roasts the noble, calling him out for literally gifting a win to a guy who basically AFK'd the entire boss fight. He openly jokes that the whole exchange screams low-key bribery, The aristocratic kid immediately gets triggered, snapping back that serving royalty is just basic loyalty. But then he completely flips the script by shoving the final flower straight into Van's chest, leaving our assassin completely dumbfounded. He absolutely did not see this plot twist coming. He just freezes brain, completely buffering, asking if the snob just glitched out and made a mistake. But the noble coldly shuts that down, stating it was 100% intentional, claiming he is just clearing his tab. There is zero chance he is going to let himself owe a massive debt to a commoner. To top it all off, he glares at Van and demands he drop the whole Wind Guy nickname, flexing that he actually has a real title. He proudly introduces himself as Falk, while the brawler noble steps into the spotlight, dropping his name as Ralph. Van matches their energy, revealing his own name, and the former rivals lock into a firm mutual handshake. Just as our dude drops a savage joke about never seeing them again if they end up flunking the test, the prince abruptly halts the squad, ordering them to hold up. Heinz then casually scoops up a handful of dead withered petals and funnels his radiant light magic into them, forcing the plants to literally revive. The second the colors pop back to life, the noble duo is absolutely mesmerized. Their eyes practically sparkle, like fanboys gushing over how insanely blessed they are to witness the prince's holy magic firsthand. But Van instantly kills the vibe sharply, reminding the fan club that daylight is burning out fast, and they need to hustle back to base immediately. Falk instantly claps back, barking at the commoner to stop playing squad leader, especially when actual royalty is literally standing right next to them. But right before they dip out, Prince Heinz casually drops a massive bombshell he had been holding onto. He highlights how he caught Van systematically erasing his own footprints in the dirt the entire trek. And according to his royal knowledge, wiping a trail perfectly clean like that is a dead giveaway for underworld assassins. The prince goes full detective mode, stating that the lethal combat style he just witnessed, combined with Van's hyper-aware micro-habits, heavily prove but a cold-blooded, meticulously trained shadow killer. Hearing this hardcore read, our boy's heart spikes into overdrive. Panic starts creeping in as he realizes he might have flexed way too hard and accidentally leaked his entire dark backstory. But little does Van know, the golden boy Prince Heinz is secretly Heinz is completely boxed in by ops on every single side. His old man, the king, wifed up a bunch of princesses from defeated territories to flex his power, spinning a toxic, tangled web of royal court drama. Heinz's mom, the fifth queen, is a pure-blooded noble born right in the kingdom's backyard, giving him a massive wildcard status. Because of that pedigree, his stepmoms and older half-siblings look at him like a walking time bomb, terrified the king is going to play favorites and crown him the ultimate heir. With that suffocating target painted on his back, Heinz lives in pure survival mode, hyper-aware that a hitman could slit his throat at any given second, and after catching those shady moves just now, alarm bells start ringing. He is dead convinced Van might actually be a sleeper. If that checks out, he cannot just slide it under the rug, gearing up to crash out and neutralize the threat right on the spot. Meanwhile, cold sweat practically drips off Van's jaw. As the realization hits, old habits die screaming. No matter how hard he tries to blend in, he cannot wash off the stench of being a top-tier killer. Before his regression, the massive catch. He cannot exactly drop that insane lore, and even if he spilled the tea, these kids would just think he is tweaking. Backed into a corner, he knows he has to cook up a legendary lie right now just to survive the allegations. Van completely flips the switch to chill mode, dropping a careless shrug, claiming he had zero clue those moves were straight out of a murderer's playbook. But Prince Heinz is not blind. He reads right through that weak excuse, absolutely refusing to buy a single word of it. Undeterred, our boy drops his voice, telling the royal to believe whatever helps him sleep at night, swearing on his life that he is spitting straight facts. The air in the room turns suffocatingly thick. Then Van takes a slow, deliberate step straight toward the prince. Falk aggressively cuts in, acting like a human shield, but in a fraction of a heartbeat, our guy completely vanishes into thin air, only to spawn directly inside Heinz's personal space. Slapping a casual hand on the royal's shoulder, Van smirks, telling him it is just a prank and to drop the whole intimidating tough guy glare. He spins a quick narrative explaining that high society manners simply are not in his vocabulary, brushing off the disrespect by painting himself as an uncultured country bumpkin who never got a tutorial in royal etiquette. He offers a half-hearted bow, keeping his mask perfectly glued on, making absolutely sure his internal panic does not leak out. But Heinz is not here to play games. He completely shuts down the yapping and demands Van stop dodging the real issue. The prince zones in on that insane footwork again, calling it out for looking exactly like a teleportation glitch, and flat out interrogates him. "Are you a hitman?" Realizing he needs a bulletproof alibi, Van drops a heavyweight name, claiming he picked up that crazy movement tech from none other than Helene Steinhardt, the literal VIP who stamped his ticket into this academy. He smoothly fabricates a story saying the noblewoman explicitly warned him to keep his skills under wraps since throwing hands is the only real superpower he is packing. Internally, the kid cringes a bit, feeling a sting of guilt for using her. Yet miraculously, that massive name drop instantly diffuses the prince's killing intent. Even Ralph physically flinches at the mention of her, proving that the Steinhardts hold god-tier clout that even the royals do not mess with. Hearing that legendary title, Heinz's mind flashes to the icy, untouchable prodigy known as the Ice Flower Lady. He is painfully aware that she sits right at the absolute peak of the Academy's food chain. The only detail bugging him is why a prestigious elite would be flexing underground murder techniques. But he quickly brushes it off. At the end of the day, he is dead certain her prestigious bloodline would not sink low enough to orchestrate a sloppy hit on a royal prince. Breaking the silence, Ralph presses Van, grilling him on why an absolute powerhouse like our boy just shrugs, claiming he is exactly as clueless as they are, and that she simply tossed him the invite and told him to show up. The prince cuts, in theory crafting, that Helene probably saw his raw potential, planning to grind his skills up and eventually draft him into her personal squad. After watching Van move like an absolute demon just minutes ago, the other trust fund kids start nodding along to the logic. The hostility completely melts away. The prince finally drops his guard, giving Van a genuine thanks and admitting he would have been a goner if he faced that monster solo. Swallowing his pride, he openly declares he owes Van his life, even dropping a respectful half-bow to seal the deal. Van, completely unfazed, savagely kills the vibe, dropping a cold reality check that they were not even throwing hands to save the royal in the first place. Hearing that blatant disrespect, Falk instantly barks at him to watch his filthy mouth. But our guy is completely unfazed. After surviving pure chaos, he is basically immune to caring. The royal catches onto this real quick. He realizes our dude is out here dropping low-key shade, instead of begging for a massive reward. The clock runs out and the trainees start dragging themselves out of the treacherous woods. A lucky few are clutching their prize blooms, but the rest, they stumble back totally, wrecked, battered, and holding absolutely nothing. Pure panic practically chokes the air. They are totally stressing over how to look their parents in the eye after fumbling their spot at this elite prep school. Cut to our shady professor, who is heavily sweating right now. The prince is officially missing in action and the panic is setting in. He had rigged the whole setup, stuffing the woods with total weakling monsters that His Highness could wipe the floor with. But what really has him spiraling, that massive demonic hell's boar, is nowhere to be seen. Right on cue, a squad of 4 finally steps out of the tree line. The professor drops a massive sigh of relief seeing his golden boy in one piece. But that chill vibe violently crashes into pure rage the second he spots Van walking right beside him. The head judge runs up, checking if our guy managed to scrape by safely. Meanwhile, the corrupt teacher totally drops his mask, accidentally screaming that Van should be resting in peace by now. Flipping the script, our boy hits him with an innocent stare, coldly asking if his breathing is somehow a problem. Realizing he just snitched on himself, the dude violently backpedals, slapping on a fake smile. He stammers out some lame excuse, claiming he was just mind-blown to see Van walk out unharmed. But Van casually drops a massive bomb. He is not rolling solo. His squad steps up, sweating buckets as they haul a seriously heavy blood-soaked sack across the dirt. The shady instructor practically shorts out. His jaw hits the floor as he stares at the gruesome prize. Even the strict judge completely loses his cool, stuttering as he questions if they actually bagged a real monster. The crew casually explains they suspected a hit was put out on the royal heir, so they chopped off the evidence and dragged it home. Dead silence drops over both officials, but their inner monologues are wildly different. The judge is basically short-circuiting, trying to figure out how a lethal threat like that slipped into the training zone. Meanwhile, the mastermind teacher is internally screaming that his perfect trap completely flopped. Every single eye locks onto him as he desperately tries to hide his massive panic. Saving his skin for now, His Highness steals the spotlight, loud and proud, gassing up his new squad. Staring at the perfectly fine prince, the professor is swallowing a huge bitter pill of defeat. The judge bows his head politely, asking if the royal heir threw hands during the showdown. Cool as a cucumber, the prince admits he was strictly on spectator duty. The professor's blood turns to ice. He is boxed into a lethal corner. If the truth leaks out that he unleashed a savage freak to flatline the heir, it is game over. His status, his entire life, totally cancelled. Playing coy, His Highness tilts his head, wondering out loud why his teacher is suddenly looking like a literal ghost. Panicking, the guy violently pivots. He starts kissing up to the prince, hyping up his fake flex of putting down that nightmare creature. But the royal gently shuts that down. He shoots a mocking smile at the flustered dude, making it crystal clear he did not lift a finger. The real most valuable players are right here. And the absolute GOAT, that was Van. Our boy Solo carried the whole squad to the finish line. Both officials are absolutely shook. The crowd is glitching out. They straight up refuse to buy that a trash-tier Gulda is out here outplaying the elites. Ralph instantly jumps into the chat. He aggressively vouches for Van, claiming his magic IQ is totally broken for a low rank. Dietrich quietly nods along, whispering that His Highness is not capping Van's raw talent is 100% real. The professor is frozen, totally gagged by the fact that nobody is stealing his royal shine. But the prince hits him with the fatal blow. He smoothly drops the mic, saying it is totally logical for a prodigy handpicked by the legendary Steinhertz family to go this hard. Honestly, Van barely picked up a single trick from Helen, but he shrugs, happily riding the wave and keeping his mouth shut. Wild rumors instantly catch fire. Everyone is hyping up this mysterious Galda backed by the terrifying Ice Blossom Lady. Catching the vibe, the head judge bows deep, handing our boy some massive respect. Shielding the royal bloodline is basically the ultimate flex you can pull for the crown. But Van, being a savage, instantly shuts him down. He sharply points out he was not playing bodyguard for anyone. Saving the prince. Just a random bonus objective from squashing that monster bug. Shutting down the small talk, he pivots back to the real prize. In perfect sync, the boys whip out their glowing blue blooms. The judge side eyes the sweaty professor, waiting for the verdict. Gritting his teeth in pure agony, the mastermind has to swallow his pride and grab the mic. He forcefully spits out the 3 names. Choking on the final word, he reluctantly drops Van's name into the mix, officially stamping their golden tickets. Boom. Just like that, our boy officially secures his spot at the academy. With the dust finally settling, the prince orders the examiner to dig deep and find out exactly where. Cut to the massive welcome ceremony. The headmaster grabs the mic and drops a major reality check. This place isn't a playground for kids who just want to toss around a few fireballs. They are here to forge raw talent into elite, battle-hardened warriors, ready to bleed for the kingdom. Standing in a massive sea of privileged magic users, Van practically glows with low-key satisfaction, soaking in the massive glow-up his life just took. Back in his first life, just breathing the air inside these walls was a completely untouchable pipe dream. Actually wearing the uniform and flexing as a real student, zero chance. Perched way up high, Helene locks eyes on our young prodigy. She knows he's the wild card destined to shatter society's toxic, deep-rooted bias against the Gilda race. Fast forward, her heels click down a huge echoing corridor, stopping right in front of a heavily guarded VIP-looking door. Inside total elite territory. A sprawling round table flexes 5 seats, and only a single chair sits empty. The 4 heavy hitters already inside shoot absolute. The sword princess Karina Rautel instantly snaps, trashing Helene for daring to walk in with a smug smirk after wasting their highly valuable time. Keeping it totally ice cold, Amelia Rodovolt doesn't even blink. She just casually asks why they were summoned for this emergency huddle. The quiet fist Arnold Clavius leans in and lays down the law. Tonight they only have one single glaring issue to deal with. And the 8th Prince Leonis. He drops the hammer, stating they are here to figure out exactly how to eliminate the total fraud wandering their halls. Genuinely clueless, Amelia raises an eyebrow, demanding he spill the actual tea. Arnold breaks it down. Letting the very first Gilda student into the academy has the high-class nobles completely losing their minds. Karina rolls her eyes hard. She totally mocks the call, throwing shade that at this rate, but the guy seething the most over Van crashing their elite party, that is Leonis. He violently snaps his gaze toward Helene, the absolute final puzzle piece of the legendary 5 Radiant Crowns. He barks out a demand for a seriously bulletproof excuse as to why she dragged some trash. Now, get this. The academy is basically a melting pot where the most insanely overpowered wealthy kids in the kingdom clash. With egos, that massive brutal turf wars and nasty brawls explode all the time. To keep the chaos in check, the top 5 absolute beasts known as the 5 Radiant Crowns hold supreme dictatorial power over the campus. So Leonis is absolutely fuming. He presses Helene on why someone with her insane clout would pull such a boneheaded move. Not backing down for a single second, Helene fires back. She flat out states she saw the raw power of Van in the flesh and stamped her approval on his insane talent. The sword princess practically gags at the thought, physically incapable of putting the words overpowered and Gilda in the exact same sentence. To her, a bloodline cursed straight out of the womb is completely washed up. Nothing more than dead weight on the battlefield. Even the usually chill Amelia nods along, calling the whole situation totally delusional. A group genetically blocked from using magic, yeah, they would get instantly wiped out in a real fight. Leonis smugly hits her with the ultimate disrespect, claiming Helene completely lacks basic brain cells. Hearing him preach about common sense instantly triggers her. She claps back that common sense is just a pathetic excuse for lazy minds to force-feed their trash opinions down everyone else's throats. Leonis hits his boiling point, his fragile ego completely shattering at a girl blatantly disrespecting his crown. Before fists start flying, Arnold smoothly cuts in with a big brain move. Why not just drag Van into the arena and test if his hands match the hype Helene is pushing? Leonis instantly bites. A wicked grin spreads across his face as he locks in a brutal penalty to publicly humiliate Helene if her pet project flops. Helene smells a trap brewing, but she just flashes a deadly polite smile, warning them not to sleep on her top draft pick. That cocky attitude sends Karina over the edge. She aggressively steps up, volunteering to personally beat the truth out of him. Leonis hits the green light, basically ordering her to totally obliterate the outsider. Brushing past Helene, Karina whispers a venomous diss, asking if the little Gilda boy is just her newest weird obsession. Karina drops the act. She makes it crystal clear she is only here to completely destroy Helene's favorite new toy and rip that smug look right off her face. Fast forward 1 week into the semester. Van is cruising down the massive academy halls, flying totally solo. Besides catching some icy glares and dealing with mad silent hate, his days are honestly passing by with zero drama. He flashes back to his last class where a salty professor tried to totally expose him by throwing out a hardcore advanced magic theory question. The whole room went dead silent because the topic was way above their pay grade. But the sloppy professor just waved it away, laughing that expecting a Gilda to use their brain was a total. He even rubbed salt in the wound loudly, mocking that his kind isn't exactly built for hitting the books. But Van completely humbled the guy, snatching control of the lecture and asserting sheer dominance, basically morphing the fossil's entire curriculum into his own masterclass. Ever since that massive flex, absolutely nobody has dared to test him. Again. A heavy smack on the shoulder from Ralph suddenly yanks him right back to reality. As his buddy drags him off to grab some food, our guy throws him a quick thanks for having his back, leaving Ralph staring blankly, utterly clueless. As the duo strolls toward the dining hall, some girl rocking purple hair suddenly snaps at them out of nowhere. She looks absolutely triggered, acting like he just committed a literal felony by breezing past without dropping a formal greeting. Both guys drop a genuine apology, but Van's eyes completely lock in when she casually presses cold steel right against his throat. He deadpan asks the psycho what her actual deal is. She just shoots him this insanely arrogant smirk, claiming it is basic common sense for a Garuda to kiss the dirt, literally pressing their foreheads into the floor. My dude remains completely unfazed, smoothly pointing out that they are literally attending the exact same academy. He is definitely not bending the knee just to stroke her massive ego. Hearing that reality check, she drops her voice to an icy whisper, demanding to know if he even grasps his rock-bottom status inside these walls. Out of nowhere, Ralph slides in to defend his bro, calling her out for doing way too much. But the upperclassman doubles down, insisting that harsh discipline is the only way to keep the lower ranks totally obedient. Van gives a tiny nod, totally agreeing that upperclassmen deserve their props, but he draws a massive line when some unhinged weirdo tries to extract that respect. At the edge of a blade, he violently clamps down on the steel, totally locking it in place so she cannot yank it back. With one brutal twist, he sends her into a massive meltdown. Channeling raw power into the metal, he launches a lethal precision strike that absolutely shatters the weapon perfectly in half. Recognizing the legendary Sever Edge strike, the once cocky senior immediately starts sweating bullets. Coming at him with some dollar store zinc sword was a completely embarrassing rookie blunder. Sure, rookies love zinc since it conducts mana like crazy, but that garbage is way too fragile for actual life or death combat. The girl whines furiously about the academy banning real swords for regular students. Apparently that top-tier VIP privilege is locked exclusively behind the Elite 5 Radiant Crowns. Catching that insanely flashy title for the first time, Van instantly gets intrigued. Talk about perfect timing, the sword princess herself glides onto the scene and straight up presses charges, accusing him of violently disrespecting a senior and busting up private property. Purple Hair instantly drops into a submissive bow, worshipping her as Lady Karina. Hearing that exact name hits our hero like a literal freight train of trauma. Back in his past life, every single soul trembled at the mention of Karina the Bloodblade. His entire brain basically error codes, completely mind-blown over why the literal angel of death is casually wandering the halls of a school. Van flashes back to his pre-regression assassin days, remembering when the entire kingdom was drowning in non-stop bloody rebellions. The absolute worst of the bunch was a psychotic purification cult dubbed the White Annihilation Ring, and the central villain burned into his memory from that nightmare Lady Karina. He remembers her as the Blood Edge, an absolute demon, who butchered countless top-tier heroes without breaking a sweat. To finally crush her insane cult, the kingdom had to bleed out and sacrifice everything. That horrific fallout eventually triggered another apocalyptic bloodbath, the ultimate war for the royal throne. Our boy only caught a glimpse of Karina once during the war, but that single chilling stare was permanently scarred into his brain. Because of that brutal past, His mind cannot compute why the realm's ultimate future raid boss is just standing here, chilling inside the very academy built to protect the kingdom. While Van is entirely zoned out in his trauma, Karina catches him, staring a hole through her, instantly slapping that onto his growing list of crimes. She completely roasts his manners angrily, calling him out for shamelessly gawking at a high-ranking senior. Our dude tosses out a lazy apology, but fully mocks her authority in the exact same breath, casually dropping the bomb that he definitely does not view her as someone above his level. Ralph completely panics, desperately trying to stop Van from digging a deeper grave, frantically warning him about who they are actually messing with. He spills that she is one of the 5 Radiants, when our boy just acts utterly oblivious. Ralph totally steps up, explaining that the 5 Radiants are the absolute top 5 apex predators of the entire school. Absolute monsters whose power scaling is just completely off the charts. He hypes up Karina as a generational prodigy who breezed into the academy at just 13 years old. Hearing those stats, Van's brain connects the dots, realizing that Karina had to be the secret daughter of some ultra-powerful noble family. The crazy part is that he never uncovered this in his past life, which means the kingdom totally wiped her history after she went full rogue. He absolutely never expected to bump into the future Grim Reaper right here, during her innocent schoolgirl phase. That realization pulls him down into a completely dark, intrusive thought. Van starts genuinely wondering if this is his golden ticket to assassinate her before the timeline completely crashes. If he just ends her right here and now, he could literally rip the future rebellion out by its roots before it even sprouts. No rebellion means no bloody war for the crown. And without that chaos, Heinz taking the throne, yeah, that dark timeline gets completely wiped off the map. While Van is deep in his own headspace, Karina catches him zoning out. She snaps him back to reality, flashing her live steel and reminding him she's legally cleared to use it. In a heartbeat, she drops into a flawless, deadly stance. It radiates pure killer instinct, the kind of posture that screams you'll be sliced open. Ralph practically begs our guy to beg for mercy before he ends up on a slab, but Van just keeps his cool, muttering that he needs to test a theory. Shoving Ralph out of the blast zone, Van squares up. He drops into his own combat form, openly daring the prodigy to make her move. The thousand-blade sword princess snaps. Blinded by rage, she lunges forward with absolute murderous intent. Her slash is a literal blur, slicing through the air faster than the human eye can track. But somehow, Van barely dances out of the crosshairs, catching a shallow scratch instead of a decapitation. Suddenly, Karina sheathed her weapon, barking that recess is over and the beatdown is paused. Promising to finish the job later, she spins on her heel and storms off down the hall, towing her purple-haired sidekick behind her. Once they dip into a dead-end corridor completely off the radar, her lackey finally asks the million-dollar question: why did she let the trash mob walk? The mighty sword princess tries to keep up her icy facade, but her mask shatters. She collapses onto the cold floor, gritting her teeth as she admits a brutal truth: she didn't let him go at all. Demanding absolute silence about what just went down, she finally rolls up her sleeve, exposing a gnarly bruise inflicted by the supposedly weak boy. Her mind flashes back to a dusty combat manual. She recognizes the exact technique, a targeted pressure point strike. It's a savage nerve blow designed to completely short-circuit the victim's motor functions, leaving them totally paralyzed. The purple-haired girl tries to sugarcoat it, asking if the clash ended in a draw, but Karina just stares at the floor. Internally, she knows she got absolutely outplayed. Rewinding the tape, her lethal strike was locked right onto his jugular. But Van ghosted right past her guard, stepping into her personal space to brutally exploit her blind spot. She threw herself backward to evade, which completely threw off her aim. In that split second of vulnerability, our boy closed the gap and nailed her nerve cluster with terrifying precision. What really rattles Karina is the technique itself. That specific counter is exclusively taught behind the closed doors of elite academies. She is mentally short-circuiting, trying to figure out how this nobody learned it. Meanwhile, the purple-haired NPC is chugging raw copium, loudly claiming the fight wasn't a tie. She insists her boss caught the dub simply because she didn't hit the deck. The sword princess flashes a fake nod to keep up appearances. But her pride is crushed. She knows that specific nerve strike isn't meant to be lethal. It is just designed to inflict blinding agony. He held back on purpose. If they were brawling for keeps, she is dead certain he would have punched her a one-way ticket straight to the graveyard. Shaking off the cold sweat, she forces herself to stand, waving it off as a sloppy mistake. But she swears on her blade that next time they cross paths, she's bringing enough firepower to shatter his defenses entirely. Cutting back to our main guy, Ralph is still freaking out, begging to know what insane theory Van was testing. Van tries to wave him off, but his buddy refuses to drop it, hounding him for answers. Van just tunes him out, getting sucked back into his own mental deep dive. He realizes that behind all that venomous trash talk, the Sword Princess was massively pulling her punches, not even bothering to activate her signature mana arts. She framed it as a brutal execution, but she never intended to leave a scratch. Breaking the silence, Van randomly blurts out that Karina is actually a sweetheart. Ralph looks at him like he grew a second head. But our hero is officially convinced she hasn't morphed into the psychotic Bloodblade just yet. And fueled by this revelation, he makes a hard vow to rewrite her tragic destiny, muttering that the near-death experience probably gave his bro a major concussion. The moment Van steps back into homeroom, the entire class goes dead silent, treating him like a walking ghost. Ignoring the heavy stares, he drops into his desk, and instantly the room erupts into furious whispers about the hallway showdown. Van forces an awkward smirk, but his two loyal sidekicks suddenly slide up, reminding him that haters are always going to hate. Ralph volunteers to march back to the Sword Princess and grovel together while Falk proudly claims he can deploy his dad's political pull to bury the drama. Van chuckles, telling the two golden retrievers to chill out and stay out of the crossfire. He playfully roasts them for evolving from cowardly bullies into actual ride-or-die homies, genuinely touched by their loyalty. But he stands firm, declaring he's going to squash this beef entirely on his own. The two bros look absolutely floored, demanding to know what kind of insane suicide mission he's plotting now. Staring ahead, our hero makes a silent promise to himself that he will do whatever it takes to stop the demonic Bloodblade from ever waking. He's forced to confront her right on the spot. Van just drops a savage one-liner mocking the Elite 5 Radiants as nothing more than glorified hall monitors. Basically, they're total nobodies. Falk and Ralph are absolutely shook by his sheer audacity, demanding to know if he grasps the massive target he just painted on his back. Suddenly, a hush falls over the room. All eyes lock onto Helene as she glides into the classroom and projects his name across the dead silent space. Kicking back in his chair, Van casually demands what the hype is all about. She politely asks him to step out for a quick chat, promising to make it brief before her next lecture hits. He just pierces her with a silent, calculating glare, knowing damn well this isn't an invite he can reject. The second the door clicks shut behind them, the entire class completely loses their minds. Literally nobody has ever dared to speak to the Ice Blossom Queen with that kind of zero-effort vibe. Smash cut to a lavish tea table, tucked deep inside a secluded courtyard. The absolute perfect spot to spill some tea. Helene flashes a soft, cryptic smile as she drops the bomb, that the 5 Radiants are officially sending Karina to gauge his true power level. Van just smirks, firing back that her little heads-up arrived way too late. Helene keeps her upbeat energy flowing, confessing she totally underestimated how fast Karina would pull up on him. Being the fated successor of the legendary Luthier Sword Clan, Karina's insane combat stats don't faze Van one bit. But his gut screams that she is way more than just another overhyped prodigy. There's a dark, unspoken intensity lurking beneath her surface. Helene tilts her head, genuinely curious about his read on her. Struggling to pinpoint the vibe, Van mutters that she radiates the tragic aura of someone who trashed her entire existence just to master the blade. Helene subtly narrows her gaze at that razor-sharp breakdown, softly commending his insane ability to read people. She then drops the lore. Karina isn't your standard silver spoon luthier aristocrat. Truth is, she's the hidden product of an illicit affair with a servant, completely erased from the family's official legacy. But that entire narrative shattered on her 10th birthday. During a quote-unquote friendly duel, she absolutely demolished her 17-year-old half-brother. Up until that exact moment, the entire clan was banking on that golden boy inheriting the empire. But her god-tier dominance forced the elders to flip the script. Even while drowning in toxic family envy her whole life, she snatched the crown as the undisputed heir, ruthlessly crushed. Soaking in this massive lore drop, Van questions how an outsider like Helene bagged such classified intel. Helene just lets out a breezy chuckle, teasing that high society literally feeds on messy rumors. Brushing that aside, her eyes drift as she visualizes her very first encounter with Karina, back at a stuffy elite gala right before the academy gates opened. The girl was posted up in a dead corner, totally isolated, while the snobs refused to even look her way. She just stood frozen, silently watching her own father treat her like invisible trash while laughing it up with the VIPs. That suffocating lack of a father's love was hauntingly obvious, reflecting perfectly in her hollow, dead inside stare. Catching the raw empathy in Helene's voice, Van presses why she didn't just slide up and save her that night. Helene sighs, explaining the brutal reality of aristocratic politics. As the future matriarch of a rival powerhouse, making a move was incredibly risky. It's viewed as a massive taboo. Poking her nose into the Luthier family's toxic inner circle would only spark a massive turf war. Van groans, utterly exhausted by how cringe and draining these high-class traditions really are. Helene's tone darkens as she warns that Karina has likely blocked out that traumatic memory entirely. But with her family's twisted politics spiraling out of control, Helene is terrified. The sword-obsessed girl is inching dangerously close to a villain arc. Van's aura instantly shifts to dead serious, asking what her game plan is if Karina actually snaps. Without missing a single beat, Helene vows she would unleash her entire arsenal to shut her down. Because otherwise, there's zero chance he could wipe out the ancient guilt anchored deep inside her soul. Suddenly, the whole puzzle clicks right into place. He always knew Helene carried that top-tier energy, the kind of absolute legend whose name gets carved into the history books. But in his past life, not a single whisper about her. She probably met a brutal end trying to drag Karina back from the edge of insanity. Like she's reading his mind, Helene shuts down his pity party real quick. She remains an absolute menace with a blade. A lethal prodigy who wouldn't blink twice before slicing him in half. But our guy just smirks, firing back that he gets the memo loud and clear, and that this little chat just dumped gasoline on his fire. Locking eyes with her, he drops a heavy vow he's going to obliterate every single one of her regrets. Back in his first life, Karina was an absolute raid boss. But this time around, he holds the cheat code to crush the nightmare before it even starts. Rattled by his raw confidence, Helene drops her guard, a fraction admitting his promise actually takes a massive weight off her chest. Honestly, she was praying he'd step up. But talk is cheap. She grills him, demanding to know if he genuinely holds the blueprint to shatter her untouchable sword techniques. Van just shrugs, dropping a casual flex. He absolutely does, and he invites her for a little after-school beatdown to show off his homework. Fast forward to sundown. Ralph and Falk are creeping through the dense woods tracking him down, though Falk is stressing hard about stalking their buddy. Ralph, though, he's mad suspicious about the guy vanishing into thin air without dropping a pin. Honestly, the curiosity is eating them alive. Especially after they literally watched him ghost the crowd to vanish into the trees with the Ice Princess. Falk tries to play it cool and pivot the conversation. That is exactly when they stumble upon a literal nightmare, our boy casually standing in the dead center of a raging sub-zero blizzard. Directly across from him, Helene is going totally nuclear. A brutal barrage of razor-sharp icicles and frozen spears bombards him with zero hesitation. Catching his friend's panicked screams, Van snaps his head around. Huge mistake, because the savage Ice Princess definitely does not do timeouts. She makes him pay for breaking eye contact mid-brawl, instantly triggering her ultimate move, the Thousand Thorns of the Frozen Garden. Colossal jagged vines of solid frost explode toward the trio. Right then and there, Ralph and Falk violently regret every single life choice that brought them to this forest. But Van he unleashes one hyper-focused, devastating slash, completely nuking the massive glacier into dust. He pivots around, flashing a cocky, punchable smirk, congratulating the boys on their immaculate timing. He actually dares them to team up with Helene and jump him straight up, flexing that he's starving for a decent challenge. Cut to Simon rolling up to greet Karina. She's giving off major toxic vibes today, instantly cutting the small talk to ask exactly what His Highness wants. Simon throws his hands up, claiming he isn't trying to rush her process, but he's dying to know her game plan for crushing the Garuda at the upcoming showdown. Tipping her head in a stiff bow, Karina assures the prince that the execution is right around the corner, simply because the special package she demanded from her bloodline just touched down. Catching that info, a wicked, chaotic glint flashes across Simon's face, especially when he spots Anastasia stumbling into the room, practically breaking her back to haul in a massive, heavy-duty coffin. Panting, Anastasia asks where to drop the dead weight. Without missing a beat, Karina orders her to drag it to her private quarters and to treat it like fragile glass. Simon is totally mind-blown, his jaw practically hitting the floor. A relic dripping with ancient, terrifying energy is sitting right under his nose. Breaking his trance, Karina hits Simon with a serious question. Would this monstrous weapon do the trick? Or is she going a little too try-hard just to swat down a measly Garuda? But Simon, he's an absolute drama king who wants a full-blown cinematic bloodbath, not some boring, quiet execution. He hypes Karina up, calling her a literal unsheathed weapon walking around in a human skin suit. A monster of her caliber desperately needs a spotlight. And honestly, there is zero stage on Earth more perfect than this upcoming brawl to broadcast her raw supremacy. Meanwhile, a massive bombshell drops on the main bulletin board, sending the entire student body into absolute chaos. The poster spells it out in black and white. Karina, an elite member of the 5 Brilliant Crowns, just threw down an official challenge to the fresh. The charge, disturbing the peace. The sentence, a savage duel. This tea spreads through the academy faster than wildfire, and flocks of students swarm the notice board aggressively, whispering and exchanging terrified glances. Every single kid on campus knows this isn't just your standard schoolyard scuffle. The general consensus echoing in the halls, this is a legally sanctioned execution masked as a match. The bloodbath is set for the Royal Academy's elite training grounds, heavily dubbed the Chalk Ring Arena. But don't get it twisted, this isn't some basic gym class playground. It's a holy battleground reserved strictly for official blood feuds and brutal survival exams that push a warrior's sanity to the absolute breaking point. Thanks to that gruesome track record, just stepping foot into that ring demands massive respect from the whole campus. When the day of reckoning finally dawns, the atmosphere is suffocatingly thick and crackling with raw anxiety. Hordes of students flood in from every inch of the academy, packing the bleachers with deafening chatter as they burn holes into the center ring. Unbothered by the hype, Van quietly pops his joints and stretches out calmly, waiting for the chaos to kick off. The audience swells by the second because literally no one wants to miss what's guaranteed to be the most legendary slaughter in Academy history the Academy has ever witnessed. Ralph glances around, muttering that the vibe in the arena feels totally suffocating. Falk shoots him a knowing look, stating it is blatantly obvious why this massive crowd packed the stands today. They all secretly know that this is nowhere near a fair fight. Ralph scrunches his face in pure confusion, prompting Helene to break it down with ice-cold logic. She leans in. This isn't a duel, she murmurs. It is a straight-up punishment. Pitting one of the elite 5 Radiants against a lowly Garuda, the entire stadium is fully expecting a brutal, one-sided massacre. That is the twisted spectacle the crowd is craving, and honestly, it is the exact reason these spectators bought tickets. Ralph shrugs, arguing that maybe the clueless masses view it that way. Falk smirks, smoothly finishing his buddy's thought, pointing out that they actually know the insane raw power Van is hiding. The dude is literally built different, totally defying any basic logic. Helene's eyes dart upward toward the VIP balcony where the prince is looming quietly, noting that even royalty seems to share their wild hunch. Right on cue, Prince Hines sits perched among the roaring fans, scanning the dirt pit with unblinking, chilling focus. Across the bleachers, Simon catches sight of him and internally spirals, wondering why the actual prince would bother attending this supposedly trash-tier matchup, but he completely draws a blank. Suddenly, the massive iron gates groan open, and Karina strides into the sunlight, intensely dragging a massive, heavy coffin. Ralph's jaw drops in absolute sweaty panic, while Helene grimly confirms that Karina just unboxed an insanely overpowered relic, specifically to crush Van. Even our boy Van physically flinches when that giant casket slams into the sand. He forces a cocky smirk, cracking a dark joke, teasing that she must have custom-ordered that giant death box just for his funeral, but he quickly flexes, adding that assuming she could actually take him down is high-key delusional. Karina snaps at him to cut the cheap tough guy crap, swearing that this very box will literally dig his grave. With a deafening clank, she kicks the lid wide open, exposing an entire arsenal of wicked blades vibrating with glowing magical runes. Meet her ultimate trump card, the sword coffin. This beast is a literal portable armory, an ancient heirloom hoarded by the legendary sword saints of House Lutetia for generations. Falk's eyes practically bug out of his head, totally baffled as to why the so-called legendary saints would ever forge something so utterly broken. Karina seamlessly rips a longsword from the rack, leveling the lethal tip right at Van's throat, screaming that she is going to make him severely regret ever breathing the air in their elite academy. Instantly, Van's playful aura entirely vanishes. His eyes turn icy. He stares her down coldly, vowing that she will be the one crying when he shatters her precious little toy box into absolute splinters. Live and in person, right in front of these thousands of screaming haters. So he taunts. When do we start? Karina barks that they already did, and boom, they violently explode off the starting line, blitzing straight into the chaos. But Karina is totally blindsided by Van's ungodly, freakish velocity. 1 millisecond, he is practically in another zip code, and the literal next frame, he materializes dead center in her personal space. Karina barely deflects his lethal strike by a hair, earning a cheeky nice reflexes from Van. But underneath, she is sweating pure bullets. The entire crowd is completely glitching out. Their brains literally cannot process how a so-called trash-tier Garuda is moving at sonic speeds. Rumors erupt that he has got to be hacking with instant teleportation magic. That wild theory catches rapid fire in the bleachers because literally nothing else makes sense to these snobs. Except, that is 100% mathematically impossible. To them, a total peasant should not even possess a single drop of mana. Falk squints hard at the dirt, openly confessing that even after watching Van spam this exact move 50 times, it still heavily looks like straight-up sorcery. Helene shuts that down instantly. Zero magic, she corrects, chillingly calm. It is the phantom step. She drops the martial science. Normally, a fighter violently kicks off the dirt, wasting precious frames of motion dragging their heavy body forward. Van completely skips that lag. Instead, he completely weaponizes his center of gravity, sharply whipping his hips to basically hydroplane his entire frame across the earth, generating explosive, unstoppable momentum. That is the insane secret behind his terrifying agility. He literally glides like he is rocking heavy-duty shock absorbers strapped to his boots. Even with the detailed play-by-play, the squad's brains are still totally fried trying to visualize the raw physics. Because, real talk, if you are standing inches away from him, that terrifying slide feels exactly like a total glitch in the Matrix. Helene freely admits that back when she first tanked this move, deep in the treacherous Garuda forest, she was fully convinced she had just been hit by a magical blink. Falk's face lights up with massive hype. If Van forcefully closes the gap, Karina's clunky longsword becomes totally useless, practically handing Van an easy W. But hold up. The arena suddenly violently flips the script. Karina goes absolutely psycho, unleashing a relentless blinding barrage of wild thrusts. The insane pressure heavily forces Van to backpedal as a vicious blade finally clips his arm, drawing first blood. Karina catches on quick. She knows he's hugging her blind spot to dodge the lethal reach of her greatsword. But Van completely misses one crucial detail, that unblunted chunk of metal right above the hilt known as the ricasso. By busting out a brutal half-swording technique, a warrior can choke up on that blade with their bare hand, totally dominating close-quarters combat. Ralph remembers hearing war stories about this savage combat style, but he is totally mind-blown seeing a high-society noble girl actually grinding to pull it off. Falk's jaw practically hits the floor as it clicks, the hype crowning Karina the next sword saint. Isn't just clout chasing, it's her literal destiny. Meanwhile, Helene keeps her eyes glued to the brutal clash, watching every single flinch. In her gut, pulling a stunt like this against a wildcard like Van is basically a death wish. Karina violently closes the gap, but Van claps back instantly, burying a lightning-fast jab right into her gut, shoving her back a step. He doesn't even let her breathe, blitzing forward to keep the heavy pressure dialed to max. Simon glares at the brawl, his face twisted in utter disgust, convinced Karina is just face-tanking hits like a total amateur. Anastasia chimes in with a whispered reality check for magic-dependent fighters. Raw physical brawling with zero mana is basically a total glitch to read or dodge. Since Van is throwing hands without a single drop of magic, his combos are completely invisible to their radar. Karina, though, she's not sweating it in the slightest. She's actually eating it up, totally protected by an invisible mana shield wrapping her body. She is dead set that some basic street brawler strikes could never shatter her armor unless Van taps into magic. But then, bam! A deafening shriek ruptures right inside her ear, making it feel like her eardrums just exploded, while a sickening wave of heat crashes through her veins, stumbling and completely shook. She gasps out, demanding to know what the hell he just did to her. Van flashes this absolute troll of a smirk, and casually roasts her, dropping that maybe her mana control is just pure trash because of whatever backwater town she crawled out of. That absolute disrespect instantly sends Karina's rage off the charts. Van casually breaks down the crazy martial art he just pulled off. The legendary air palm. He essentially weaponizes wind pressure straight from an open-handed strike. That highly compressed pocket of air blasts out like a sonic boom, sniping straight into the inner ear canals to completely wreck her balance. As this insane breakdown echoes across the stadium, the entire crowd holds their breath, totally paralyzed by the absolute madness going down on the dirt. Lady Karina, the untouchable sword princess, is actually getting bullied backward. Simon is practically frozen rigid watching her give up ground, his blood totally boiling, because seeing elite royalty look this pathetic in front of peasants is making him sick. Karina is still fighting off that maddening ringing, drilling through her skull when Van deadpan asks if she just wants to throw in the towel. The second those words leave his mouth, he launches himself like a missile to finish the job. But wait. Karina slowly tilts her head up and this absolutely psychotic grin slices across her face. The whole arena instantly feels the vibe shift. Giving up ground was never a desperate retreat, it was a trap all along. She violently drives her greatsword straight into the dirt, triggering an absolute nuke of magical energy that blasts outward. Massive tremors rip through the stadium floor, shredding the ground and blasting stone shrapnel into the air. The crowd starts freaking out, while Van just plants his feet and mentally dissects the incoming attack. From his POV, she literally just swings a mana-soaked blade. But even without taking a direct hit, the pure shockwave alone rattles his bones right down to the marrow. Karina gloats, flexing that this insane destruction is exactly why generations of legendary sword saints gave their lives to master the Heavenfall art. But Van's sharp eyes catch the fatal flaw. The physical weapon itself is literally crying out, barely holding together under that god-tier mana output. Up in the stands, Simon finally cracks a nasty smirk. He pieces it together. Karina was straight up sandbagging this entire time. Now that she's dropping her true power level, it's game over and there is 0% chance Van survives this clash. As far as he's concerned, the match is already wrapped up. If Van tries to face tank this next swing, he is going to be instantly vaporized down to his skeleton. But Van not a single drop of sweat. Instead, he just coldly tells Karina to stop treating her gear like garbage. Karina snaps back that she normally babies her weapons, but she's totally ready to end this absolute joke of a duel with one final swing. Right then, she cranks her mana output to an insanely critical level, pumping it all straight into the cracking steel. The audience goes dead silent, suddenly realizing she is actually out for blood. Ralph and Falk start sweating, whispering frantically. As they try to process the absolute chaos on the field, Helene cuts off their panic attack and breaks down the grim reality. She points out that sure, Van is landing solid combos, but his hits totally lack the one-shot knockout power needed to drop her. On the flip side, Karina is wielding the Heaven Fall technique, which could literally delete Van from existence in a single hit. This proves that Karina is purposely. She is literally eating his attacks on purpose, just to turn this. Helene points out a terrifying reality if Karina triggers her ultimate move, the Heavenfall Blade. Right as Van rushes her, dodging the actual sword won't even matter. The pure kinetic shockwave will completely obliterate him at point-blank range. Ralph and Falk go totally mute, sweating over whatever insane stunt Van is cooking up. Out in the dirt of the arena, Karina hoists her massive blade and orders him to swallow the humiliation. That perfectly fits a low-tier peasant like him. She even dangles a mercy card, claiming she might let him breathe if he just bows down. Van replies with a playful, cheeky tone, pointing out how weirdly obsessed she is with this whole status concept. Karina snaps back, calling it the absolute unquestionable law of the food chain. Mana dictates your blood's value, she spits out. That is the very bedrock holding this entire nation together. Van straight up bursts into laughter after hearing that logic. Wow, he mocks, that sounds exactly like the textbook garbage a snobby aristocrat would regurgitate. Leaning in, he twists the knife. But tell me, does playing pretend actually make you a real noble? That comment hits a raw nerve. Karina's brain short-circuits with absolute fury, but Van ruthlessly keeps pushing. He exposes her deepest, darkest secret. Her veins are pumping with both elite and filthy commoner blood. He calls her out, saying that is exactly why she is trying so desperately to validate herself as a real noble, just so her daddy will finally acknowledge her. Boom. Those words land an emotional critical hit directly on her hidden weakness. Karina completely freezes. Her mind is racing. How on earth did this trash figure out something so intensely personal? Pure blinding rage takes the wheel and she starts dumping ungodly amounts of mana into her. The crowd starts panicking for Van as the lethal pressure suffocates the arena, but Helene catches on instantly. It clicks, he is purposely triggering Karina's trauma, so she will throw a desperate, sloppy, all-in attack without thinking. Ralph is absolutely losing his mind. Why would anyone willingly poke a walking nuke, gambling his own life just to force that reaction? But here's the thing, Van wasn't just talking trash. His words dug straight into Karina's core, unearthing the toxic shame she has carried for years. She has spent her whole life feeling like a total outsider, crashing a VIP party. Sure, she is an aristocrat's kid, but she is the product of a concubine, and that illegitimate label permanently locked her out of the family's inner circle. Growing up, she obsessively mimicked the elites. She mirrored their elegance, memorizing their duties, but despite all that, she never truly felt like one of them. She constantly sensed ghost-like eyes glaring at her, just waiting for her to fail. That suffocating anxiety never left her. Ironically, it is exactly why she experienced a split second of empathy when she first spotted Van strolling through the academy with such fearless swagger. Despite him being a Garuda, she felt a weird kinship. That is the real reason she volunteered to test him in the first place, hoping to flex her power and settle the beef without killing him. But instead of showing gratitude for that tiny bit of mercy, this punk absolutely roasted her. Because of that, she flips a mental switch, deciding he deserves the full brutal weight of her wrath. Karina violently swings her weapon, screaming that she is going to end his life. Van doesn't run, he violently dashes straight at her. Karina triggers the Heavenfall Blade, dropping the apocalyptic strike with everything she has got. But when the dust finally settles, Karina's heart literally stops. Van caught it with his bare hands. He is casually gripping her massive god-tier sword like it is nothing. The entire audience goes into absolute system failure. A literal weapon-snatching technique just shut down a descending. The entire crowd is glitching out, believing this should be totally impossible. In actual combat, nobody can just catch a plunging greatsword with their naked hands and live to tell the tale. But what Van pulls off right in front of them completely rewrites the combat meta. First, he perfectly syncs his palm's velocity with the falling steel. The exact microsecond they make contact, he violently breaks its momentum. In that microscopic instant before the sword finishes its full swing, he completely disperses and absorbs the kinetic force, buckling his knees to sink the shockwave deep into the earth, sending a massive crack exploding across the arena floor. It is a broken countermove called Still Glyph the Zero-style grasp. It is the exact same cheat code technique he once used to slam Helene's ice spears straight into the dirt back in the forest. Van flashes a teasing devilish smirk, grinning like an absolute menace. The Heavenfall blade is definitely a monster of an attack, he taunts, but I simply know exactly how to murder its momentum. Karina screams in pure denial, refusing to believe her own eyes. That split second of emotional chaos completely shatters her defenses. Van does not hesitate, he lunges, aiming a ruthless strike right at her chest. The brutal impact launches her backward, slamming her violently against the massive coffin. Her legs give out entirely, dropping her straight to her knees in the dead center of the arena. One spectator literally struggles to process what just happened. The entire crowd goes completely dead silent, holding their breath as they stare at the thousand-blade sword princess, who has been totally humiliated and forced to bow down. Whispers ripple through the stands. Is this the terrifying true strength of the Garuda race? Up in the VIP seats, Simon and Anastasia are practically grinding their teeth to dust, while Ralph and Falk are secretly hyping him up, praying Van keeps pressing the attack and ends it right here. But Van has a completely different script in mind. He just stands there, chilling, letting Karina snap out of her daze. Shivering with adrenaline, she finally looks up and snaps, demanding to know why he didn't just end it. Pushing herself off the dirt, her legs trembling, she glares at him. Is he showing her pity? Because she definitely doesn't need his absolute charity. Van shuts that nonsense down instantly. He flat out tells her that mercy isn't even in his vocabulary right now. But honestly, beating up some fancy noble girl who is holding back half her power is just pathetic. He wants the real deal, every single trick up her sleeve. He challenges her to drop the act and show him the real Karina. That smirk hits her ego like a freight train. Furious Karina finally cracks open the seal on her coffin, unleashing a suffocating wave of energy as she plunges her hand into the dark void and rips out one of the most legendary weapons in the entire kingdom. Meet the Star Ring Sword, a bizarre whip-like blade forged from dangerously thin, hyperflexible steel, twisting and coiling like a living metallic serpent. A wave of nostalgia hits Van. Back in his past life, that exact weapon was feared as the massacre sword Bloodchain Prullet. Locking eyes with him, Karina's gaze burns with pure, unhinged resolve. She vows to make him witness every single drop of blood she sacrificed, to claw her way to the top. And honestly, this is the exact hype moment Van has been craving. She screams out that if he is so desperate to taste her ultimate strength, she will gladly serve it on a silver platter. But she drops a heavy warning when he gets shredded to pieces. His blood is entirely on his own hands. The arena practically quakes as the coffin explodes with pure, raw aura. A lethal hurricane of silver steel bursts outward, swirling around her body with apocalyptic speed. Up in the stands, Ralph and Falk are completely mind-blown, jaws on the floor. They desperately try to figure out if this is just some insane sword trick, but the reality is way more terrifying. Aline steps in and drops the lore. They are staring straight at Requiem, a legendary national magic art circle. It is an absolute god-tier move. Only a tiny fraction of the Lutia bloodline ever manages to unlock it through sheer magic. The spell hyper-buffs the sword's elasticity, cracking the blade's tip through the air at literal supersonic velocity. Down in the dirt, Van just watches the metal cyclone form, totally unfazed. The blinding vortex looks like 100 spinning spears trapping everything inside a deadly loop. Smirking, Karina finally calls out her signature move, the dance of circling spears. She mocks him, bragging that stepping into her strike zone is an instant game over. Fire, lightning, or human flesh, it all gets blended into dust the second those blades start spinning. And the worst part, that murder tornado is rapidly expanding to swallow the entire Colosseum. She actually gives him an out, taunting that if he is scared, he can totally tap out and cry his way home. She is feeling generous after all. But if he stubbornly plants his feet, that grinder will chew him up until not even a single bone fragment is left. Van takes in her whole villain speech without flinching. Deadpan, he tells her to save her breath and stop expanding the blast radius, because he is coming straight for her. He casually shuts his eyes for a heartbeat. The second they snap open, his vision shifts. Sure, the Razor Storm is blindingly fast, but it is not totally invisible. Faint glowing trajectories trace through the chaos, revealing the exact geometric path of every single incoming strike. Right then, he flips the switch on a cracked skill called tachypsychia. It is a bizarre psychological glitch, where the human brain goes into hyper-overdrive, processing reality in extreme slow motion when faced with certain death. It is a raw biological cheat code that maps out the perfect survival route even when your senses are drowning in absolute sensory overload. Regular humans might trigger this once in a lifetime by pure luck, but Van He can hack his own brain on command. Riding that wave of godlike perception, he casually strolls straight into the meat grinder, and exactly as he calculated, he doesn't even get a scratch. Instead, he literally glides through the steel hurricane completely unharmed. Simon watches in awe as Van casually swats away the lethal strikes, while even the prince stares totally mind-blown and hypnotized by the spectacle. Van has already cracked the weapon's cheat code. With a spring sword, the entire center of gravity anchors right at the very tip. That means the weapon's whole momentum hinges on that one tiny pivot. If he just smashes the tip itself, the whole flawless technique shatters, practically handing him the win. Karina shoots him a stunned glare, straight up calling him an absolute monster. Unfazed Van replies that being a freak of nature has nothing to do with it. He just grinds way harder than anyone else, exactly like she does. Karina totally short-circuits at that comment. Her blood starts boiling all over again as Van keeps pushing her buttons. He preaches that the spring sword actually picks its own master. Any amateur lacking god-tier precision would literally slice themselves into ribbons. Coasting on pure genetics and a fancy swordsman bloodline, yeah, that is never enough to tame a beast like this. Then he hits her with the real question. Exactly how many years did she sacrifice bleeding for that single weapon? Karina deadass freezes since she never actually stopped to process that. Instantly, her mind spirals back to a hazy, bittersweet childhood memory. She remembers her dad showing her the ropes of gripping a hilt. To him, it was probably just a fleeting distraction. But to her, it was everything. For one split second, she actually felt a genuine spark of connection. She desperately clung to that tiny crumb of fatherly love. Sadly, reality hit hard, and that vibe vanished forever. Drowning in endless political drama, her dad totally ghosted his illegitimate daughter. After all, he already had his shiny, picture-perfect main family to protect. Left in the shadows, Karina decided to completely weaponize her skills. She figured if she mutated into an untouchable powerhouse, her dad would have no choice but to step up, claim her, and finally welcome her into the actual family. From that exact second she locked in, grinding day and night, she totally abandoned the concept of rest. That brutal obsession slowly morphed her into an absolute menace. Eventually, she publicly wrecked her golden boy half-brother in front of a massive crowd, riding that insane victory. The pathetic pity stares vanished. But the universe is cruel, and now she had to survive surrounded by pure fear and toxic jealousy. Even her own dad started shooting her these weird, terrified glances. Any microscopic trace of sympathy he had, poof, gone. Sure, he finally made it official, claiming her as a legit heir and his actual daughter, despite being the child of a mistress. But the baggage of her existence was way too heavy for his fragile ego. To shield his precious main household, he brutally turned his back on her. Right then and there, the reality check dropped. Cold Steel was her only loyal companion. From that nightmare onward, she made her existence impossible to ignore. She promised to unleash such broken god-tier strength that nobody would ever dare toss her aside again. It was the only messed-up strategy she thought would force her bloodline to respect her. Snapping back to the chaotic arena, Karina screams out, demanding to know what some random guy could ever understand about her trauma, fueled by pure, unfiltered rage. She launches herself right at his throat. The vicious metal tornado actually manages to slice a few shallow gashes into his skin, but midway through the rampage, her lightning-fast strikes start lagging, losing their flawless rhythm. Van instantly catches the sloppy, split-second openings bleeding into her combos. Instead of dodging, the madman literally lunges forward, suffocating her personal space. Karina's brain absolutely short-circuits. Why the hell is he pushing into her kill zone? Literally everyone else always ran screaming from her blade's massive reach. It makes zero sense to her. How is a dude with absolutely zero magic refusing to back down from certain death?